The smoke hit me before the heat did. I want you to understand that. Before I felt the flames, before I felt anything burning, I smelled my own house dying. 31 years of my life turning to ash in the time it takes to blink twice. And the last thing I heard before the beam came down on me wasn't a scream. It wasn't my name. It was 4 words, said calm as a Sunday morning. The old man is useless now. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 6 hours, to when I still believed my family loved me. My name is Arthur Kessler. I'm 67 years old, and until the night my house burned down outside Macon, Georgia, I thought I'd done everything right. I grew up poor in Bibb County, the kind of poor where you learn to fix things because nobody's coming to fix them for you. I laid brick for 11 years before I saved enough to buy my first truck and a stack of business cards I printed myself at a copy shop on Vineville Avenue. Kessler & Sons development started with 1 crew and a prayer. By the time I turned 55, we had contracts across Middle Georgia, schools, strip malls, a hospital wing in Warner Robins with my name on a little brass plaque nobody ever reads. I built that company for one reason. My son, Daniel, was going to have it easier than me. That was the whole plan. I put him through Georgia Tech, brought him into the business the day he graduated, and 2 years ago, against my lawyer's advice, against my own gut, if I'm honest, I signed over 40% of Kessler & Sons development into his name. A father trusts his son, I told myself. That's not weakness. That's what the money was for all along. His wife, Renata, came into the picture during his last year of college. Sharp as a fillet knife, that one. Beautiful, polished, always 3 steps ahead, in a conversation you didn't know you were having. I never fully warmed to her. Something about the way she looked at the house, my house, the one my late wife Diane and I built board by board out on Vineyard Road, like she was already measuring it for new curtains. You're being an old fool, I told myself more than once. She just has a business mind. That's good for Daniel. God, I wish I'd trusted that first instinct. 3 weeks before the fire, I overheard something I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd come back to the house early from a job site in Perry. A supplier had stood us up, no point staying, and I heard voices in the kitchen. Daniel's voice, low. Renata's voice, lower. He's still got controlling interest, Daniel. As long as your father's name is on those documents, the bank sees an aging man, not a company they can restructure the loan around. He's not going to just hand it over, Ren. He doesn't have to hand anything over. A pause. Ice in a glass. People his age forget things. People his age make mistakes. All it takes is a little help remembering. I stood in that hallway for a long 10 seconds, my old bones cold, in a way that had nothing to do with the AC. Say something, part of me screamed. Walk in there right now and ask her what the hell she means by that. But I didn't. I backed out quiet as I came in, got back in my truck, and drove around Macon for 2 hours telling myself I'd misheard. Telling myself 31 years of building something with my own hands didn't just get talked away over kitchen counter granite I paid for. If you're watching this from somewhere warm tonight or somewhere cold, Ohio, Texas, doesn't matter. I want you to know something before this story gets worse. It does get worse. If stories like mine, the ones about betrayal and what a person does after, are the kind that keep you up at night in the best way, stay with me. Hit subscribe. I promise you this isn't over. The night of the fire started ordinary. Too ordinary, looking back. That's the cruelest thing about disaster. It never announces itself with thunder. It just walks in through an outlet you forgot to have checked. Renata had been pushing for weeks to modernize the estate, her words, and Daniel had gone along with rewiring half the downstairs without pulling permits. I'd argued against it. Old houses need old-fashioned respect, I told him. He didn't listen. Neither had listened to me on much of anything in over a year. I woke at 2:14 in the morning, to the smoke alarm screaming and a light under my bedroom door that wasn't supposed to be there. By the time I got into the hallway, the stairwell was already choking with black smoke, and I could hear Bruno, my dog, a scruffy old golden mix Diane and I raised from a puppy the year before she passed, barking from somewhere down near the kitchen. "Daniel!" I shouted. "Renata!" Daniel appeared through the smoke first, coughing, eyes wide with something I mistook, in that half second, for fear for me. I reached for him. I actually reached for my son's hand in the middle of a burning house, the way I used to when he was 6 years old crossing Vineville Avenue. He shoved me backward. Not a stumble, not an accident of panic. 2 hands, flat on my chest, and a push that sent me stumbling into the collapsing frame of the hallway just as a support beam gave way above me. The last clear thing I saw was my son turning away from me, toward the sound of the dog barking. Saving Bruno, not me. The beam came down across my legs and hip, pinning me to the floor in a room filling with smoke, and through the ringing in my skull I heard footsteps, fast, deliberate, heading not toward me, but toward the study, toward the safe. I couldn't move, couldn't scream loud enough for the smoke choking my throat. All I could do was turn my head and watch Renata Kessler step past me in the orange light, a fireproof lockbox clutched to her chest like a newborn. 30 years of my documents, my will, my company's real ownership records, all of it in her hands and moving away from me. She looked down, just for a second, long enough for our eyes to meet. I will remember that look until the day I actually die. There was no panic in it, no grief, just calculation, cold as a closed ledger. The old man is useless now, she said, to no one, to everyone, to the house itself. And she walked out the front door. I lay there under that beam, and I felt something in me break that had nothing to do with bone. This is how it ends, I thought, watching the ceiling above me start to glow orange at the edges. 31 years, and this is how it ends. Alone, on the floor of my own house, because I trusted the wrong people with everything I built. The smoke thickened. My vision started tunneling, black creeping in from the edges like ink through water. I thought of Diane. I thought, absurdly, of the brass plaque on that hospital wing nobody reads. I thought, nobody is coming. And then, through the smoke, through the roar of a house eating itself alive, a shape. A man moving fast, low to the ground the way you're trained to move through a burning building. Not a firefighter. Not yet. Too soon for that. The trucks hadn't even reached Vineyard Road. Just a man, running straight toward me while my own family ran away. I didn't recognize him. Not then. The last thing I remember, before the world went completely black, was his hand closing around my wrist, and a voice I hadn't heard in almost 6 years saying my name like he never expected to say it again. I lost consciousness, not knowing if I would wake up. Not knowing that the man who just pulled me out of that fire was someone I had wronged, badly, a long time ago, and that the truth of who saved me that night would turn out to be the second betrayal of my life. Just not the kind I was expecting. I woke up in a hospital bed in Macon with tubes in my arm and a stranger's name in my mouth. Marcus, I rasped, before I even opened my eyes all the way. Marcus Cole. A nurse leaned over me, confused. Sir, do you know where you are? I did. Coliseum Medical Center. I'd donated to their burn unit once, years back, never thinking I'd end up in one of its beds with my hips screwed back together and half my left forearm wrapped like a mummy's. What I didn't know, not yet, was how the man who pulled me out of my own burning house had ended up standing in that doorway at all. Daniel came to see me on the second day. Alone. He stood at the foot of my bed with his jacket still smelling faintly of smoke, and for one long moment I let myself believe he'd come to say he was sorry, that he'd tell me it was an accident, a shove born of panic, a son who lost his head in a burning hallway and didn't understand what his own hands had done. The insurance adjuster wants a statement, he said instead. We're telling them you ran back in for Mom's jewelry box. Confused, disoriented. That's the story, Dad. Just stick to that, all right? He's not asking me to lie to protect me, I thought, staring at my own son's face and barely recognizing it. He's asking me to lie to protect them. I didn't run back in, Daniel, I said. My voice came out flat. Dead. You pushed me. Something flickered behind his eyes. There and gone. Fast as a struck match. Guilt, maybe. Or just calculation. Learned secondhand from his wife. You're confused, he said. The smoke, the concussion. Dad, please, just let it go. He left before I could say another word. And that was the moment I understood, lying in that bed with my ruined arm and my dead wife's house reduced to ash on Vineyard Road, that I had two choices. I could spend whatever years I had left as the sad old man who got confused during a fire. Or I could become something they never accounted for. Marcus Cole came back on the fourth day, this time without the smoke and the sirens, just a quiet man in his 40s, standing awkwardly in my doorway with a coffee he didn't drink. I knew his face the second the fog cleared. 6 years ago, he'd been a structural engineer on my payroll. Sharp, meticulous, the kind of man who caught problems before they became disasters. Then a load-bearing wall failed on a strip mall project in Warner Robins, and I fired him. Publicly. Loudly. I told the whole crew he was careless, when the truth, a truth I only half admitted to myself back then, was that the fault traced back to a permit I'd rushed through to save 6 weeks on the schedule. I ruined his reputation to protect my own. "Why'd you come back for me?" I asked him, "after what I did to you?" He was quiet, a long moment. "Because I drove past your house every year around this time, Mr. Kessler. Habit, I guess. Saw the smoke from 2 streets over." He shrugged, like it cost him something to admit it. Didn't think about who was inside, just ran. This man owes me nothing, I thought, and he's the only one in 6 years who's told me a true thing. If you've ever laid in a hospital bed and realized the people who were supposed to love you had already decided you were disposable, I think you know exactly the kind of cold I'm talking about. If this story feels familiar in a way that hurts a little, that's all right. That's why we're both still here. I was discharged 3 weeks later into a rental house Daniel and Renata picked out for me. Small on the edge of town, temporary, they said, just until the insurance settles. I didn't argue. Arguing would have told them I still had fight left in me, and for the first time in my life, I understood the value of letting people underestimate you. Renata visited exactly twice in those 3 weeks. Both times, she brought paperwork. The first was a simplified power of attorney, framed as a formality to help manage my medical bills while I recovered. I signed a version of it. A version Marcus had quietly reviewed the night before, stripped of the 3 clauses that would have handed her authority over Kessler and Sons' remaining assets. She doesn't know I read it twice, I thought, handing it back with a trembling, deliberately unsteady signature. Let her believe I still can't hold a pen straight. The second time, she came with a psychiatrist. Dr. Ellen Voss, soft-spoken, clipboard in hand, here to conduct a wellness evaluation at the family's request, given everything Arthur had been through. I answered her question slow, vague. I let silences stretch a beat too long before responding, let my hand shake reaching for a glass of water. I gave her, deliberately, exactly the portrait of decline that Renata had built for her months ago, whispered into the right ears at the right time. I found out later, much later, that this was the second appointment of its kind. There had been one in the spring before the fire that I was never told about. She's building a file on me, I realized, lying awake that night in the rental house. She's been building it for months. The fire wasn't the plan. The fire was just faster. That was the night everything changed. I stopped being a grieving old man waiting for his family to remember him. I became something colder, something patient. Marcus and I started meeting twice a week, officially helping an old friend get his affairs in order. Unofficially, we were rebuilding a case. He pulled the electrical permits, or rather, the absence of them, for the renovation Renata had pushed through 6 months before the fire. He found the contractor who'd flagged the wiring as substandard and been quietly paid to keep quiet about it. He found the invoice for that payment routed through an account with Renata's maiden name on it. Negligence, I thought, staring at that invoice in Marcus's cramped little office off Riverside Drive. Maybe worse. Maybe she knew exactly what that wiring could do, and she let it sit there anyway. I started rebuilding too. Quietly, through a shell entity Marcus helped me set up, buying back small blocks of Kessler and Son shares that had been sold off by nervous minority investors spooked by the fire and the rumors of my decline. Nobody traced the purchases back to me. Why would they? Everyone already believed the old man was finished. Then, 6 weeks into this new, colder version of myself, Daniel showed up at the rental house. Alone. No Renata. Bruno trailing behind him on a leash, tail low, like even the dog understood something was wrong. "She wants to bring the competency filing forward," he said, not meeting my eyes. Says the doctor's evaluation supports it. Full guardianship, Dad. Control of everything, the remaining shares, the insurance payout, all of it. My chest went tight. This is it, I thought. This is the move. Everything Marcus and I have built has maybe 6 weeks to hold up, and she's about to file in 3. And you? I asked him. What do you want, Daniel? He looked at me then, really looked for the first time since the fire. And for one unguarded second, I saw something that might have been shame. I want this to be over, he said, and left before I could ask him what this meant. The fire, the lie, or me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table in that rental house with Marcus's folder spread out in front of me, the wiring report, the buried invoice, the quiet share purchases nobody had noticed, and I understood something that changed the shape of everything ahead. Renata believed she was 3 weeks from erasing me completely. A competency hearing, a guardianship order, and Arthur Kessler would cease to exist as anything but a name on a medical file. What she didn't know, what nobody in that family knew, was that the confused old man they'd been building a case against for 6 months now controlled enough shares, evidence, and legal ground to walk into that same hearing and burn her entire plan to the ground in front of a judge. She thought she was setting a trap. She had no idea she was about to walk straight into mine. The hearing was set for the 2nd week of October. I circled the date on a calendar Marcus brought me, and for the first time since the beam came down on my legs, I felt something besides grief. I felt ready. The morning of the hearing, Macon smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. October in Middle Georgia does that. Clear skies holding their breath, the air thick and gray at the edges, like the whole sky is waiting on something to break. I stood outside the Bibb County Courthouse in a suit Marcus had picked out for me, one size looser than I used to wear, and I let myself feel, for just a moment, exactly how far I'd fallen. 67 years old, I thought, standing outside a courthouse in a borrowed-looking suit, about to fight my own family for the right to still exist, as a man who makes his own decisions. Then I straightened my back and walked inside. Renata's attorney was a slick, silver-haired man named Preston Cade, the kind of lawyer who bills $400 an hour to sound reasonable while destroying you. He opened with sympathy, for me, of all people. Spoke about the tragic trauma I'd endured. Spoke about a family torn between love and hard truths. Every sentence dressed in concern. Every sentence a knife wrapped in a napkin. Dr. Voss took the stand next. Same soft voice from the rental house. She described a man with notable cognitive decline, delayed processing, disorientation consistent with post-traumatic stress, and possible early-stage dementia. I watched Daniel while she spoke. He sat beside Renata, jaw tight, staring at a spot on the table that didn't exist. Not once did he look at me. He knows this is a lie, I thought, and he's letting it happen anyway. That's its own kind of betrayal. Maybe the worst kind. Not the one that shoves you into the fire, but the one that watches, silent, while somebody else finishes the job. My own attorney, a quiet, precise woman named Denise Okafor that Marcus had found for me 3 months earlier, someone with no ties to the Macon legal circle Renata's family had cultivated for years, leaned toward me at the table. "When they open the floor for your side," she murmured, "we go all at once, no half measures. You ready?" Ready. The word felt strange in my mouth after 2 months of pretending I wasn't. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually sit with it a second before you keep reading. If you were in that courtroom, watching people who share your blood build a case to erase you, would you have done what I was about to do? Or would you have found it in yourself to stop?" Cade called his next witness, and my stomach dropped in a way I didn't expect. Not Renata, not another doctor, Bruno's veterinarian. A young woman named Dr. Patel took the stand and, under Cade's careful questioning, testified that in the 18 months prior to the fire, I had missed 2 of the dog's scheduled appointments and once called the office confused about the date. Small, almost nothing, but Cade built it into a pattern, brick by brick, the same way I used to build actual walls, each detail meaningless alone, devastating stacked together. She's thorough, I thought, watching Renata's face for the first time since the hearing started. calm, composed, not a flicker of doubt. She really believes she's already won this. When Cade finished, Judge Wallace Pruitt, a heavy-set man in his 60s who'd clearly sat through 100 hearings just like this one and looked deeply tired of all of them, glanced at the clock, then at our table. "Ms. Okafor, your witness, or do you have a response?" Denise rose slowly, buttoning her jacket. Beside her on the table sat a single accordion folder, thin, unassuming, nothing like the mountain of paperwork Cade had wheeled in on a cart. They think we have nothing, I thought, watching Renata's attorney lean back in his chair with the faint, satisfied posture of a man who considers the match already over. Let them keep thinking that for another 90 seconds. "Your Honor," Denise said, "before we begin, I'd like to note for the record that we have 3 additional witnesses waiting outside this courtroom who were not on the original filing, added within the last legal window permitted under Georgia civil procedure." Cade sat up. For the first time all morning, something uncertain crossed his face. "Objection, Your Honor. We were never notified." "You were notified this morning, Counselor," Denise said, calm as still water. "Within the required 48-hour window. Check your email." Judge Pruitt sighed, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and waved a hand. "Noted. Continue, Ms. Okafor." He doesn't know yet, I thought, watching Cade's face, watching Renata's spine straighten just slightly, the first crack of tension I'd seen in her all morning. None of them know yet what's about to walk through that door. Denise opened the thin folder. "Your Honor, the state of my client's mental competency isn't actually what's in question today. What's in question is whether the party petitioning for guardianship over Mr. Kessler has been fully honest with this court, and with him, about the circumstances of the fire that led to this hearing in the first place." Cade shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is completely outside the scope." "I'll allow it," Judge Pruitt said, leaning forward now, some of the tiredness gone from his face. "Go on." Denise pulled the first document from the folder. A photocopy, edges neat, corner stamped with a date 6 months before the fire. I watched Renata's eyes drop to it from across the room. Just for a half second, just long enough for me to see something underneath all that composure finally shift. She recognizes it, I thought, my pulse climbing. She knows exactly what that page is before Denise even says a word. "Your Honor," Denise said, "this is a wiring inspection report dated April 14th of this year, flagging substandard renovation work at the Kessler residence on Vineyard Road. I'd like to enter it into evidence as Exhibit A." The courtroom doors at the back opened. I didn't turn around right away. Denise had told me not to, told me to keep my eyes forward no matter what happened behind me. Let the room react first. But I heard it. Footsteps, more than one set, and Renata's breath catching, sharp and sudden, from across the table. "Your Honor," Denise said, voice steady as a held note, "I'd also like to call our first witness." I finally turned my head. And the person walking through those courtroom doors was someone none of us, not Cade, not Renata, not even Daniel, whose face had gone the color of old paper, had expected to see in that room again. Denise leaned down close to my ear, just before the room erupted into motion. "Mr. Kessler," she whispered, "it's about to happen. Whatever you do, don't say a word until I tell you to." I sat there, hands flat on the table to keep them from shaking, watching 6 months of quiet, patient work walk toward the witness stand in the shape of a single person nobody in that family thought would ever testify against them. The gavel hadn't even come down yet, and already I could see it in Renata's eyes. For the first time since the night of the fire, she understood she wasn't the one holding all the power in that room anymore. The man walking toward the witness stand was Ray Tolliver. I hadn't laid eyes on him since the week before the fire, when he'd come by the house twice, nervous, asking to speak with Renata alone. At the time I'd assumed it was just contractor business. I never imagined I was watching a man about to become the reason my family's whole story caught fire in a courtroom. Ray was the electrician who'd wired the downstairs renovation, the one whose name never made it onto the permit paperwork, because there never was any permit paperwork. He sat down, hands shaking slightly, and wouldn't look at Renata even once. "Mr. Tolliver," Denise said gently, "can you tell the court what you told my investigator 3 weeks ago?" 3 weeks, I thought. She's had him 3 weeks and never told me. She didn't want me carrying the weight of it before I had to. Ray cleared his throat. I flagged the wiring in that back hallway back in April, told Mrs. Kessler it wasn't up to code, told her it needed to be pulled and redone before anybody moved back into that wing. His voice cracked. She told me to leave it, said she'd handle the inspection paperwork herself. Then a week later I got $4,000 wired into my account with a note that just said, "For your silence." The room went dead silent. Cade was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, this witness has no documentation." "I have the wire transfer," Denise said, already sliding a second document across the table. "Exhibit B sent from an account under the name Renata Voss Kessler, her maiden name, Your Honor, 3 days after Mr. Tolliver raised the safety concern." Voss, I thought, my mind snagging on the name for half a second before it clicked. That's why Dr. Voss's testimony always felt too clean, too rehearsed. Same family, a cousin maybe, somebody Renata trusted to write exactly the story she needed. I glanced at Denise. She gave the smallest nod, confirming what I'd just pieced together on my own. She's been 3 moves ahead of Cade this entire time, I thought, and she let him believe he was winning until the exact moment it would hurt the most. Renata's composure finally broke, not loudly, not with tears, with something colder, a kind of controlled fury I recognized because I'd seen a flicker of it in her once before in my own kitchen, 3 weeks before the fire. "This is insane," she said, low to Cade, not quite quiet enough. "He's lying. Someone paid him to lie." "Mrs. Kessler," Judge Pruitt said, his voice sharp now, all the tiredness gone. "You'll have your opportunity to respond. Not now." Denise wasn't finished. "Your Honor, I'd also like to enter into evidence the contents of a fireproof safe recovered from the Kessler property 3 days after the fire, a safe removed from the burning house not by firefighters, but by Mrs. Kessler herself, while my client lay trapped beneath a collapsed beam in an adjoining room. That landed like a physical blow. I watched it hit Daniel first, his head snapping up, staring at his wife like he was seeing a stranger. He didn't know, I realized. He knew about the wiring, maybe. He knew about the guardianship filing. But this, the safe, the moment she chose it over me, some part of him never let himself really look at that. Denise laid the safe's inventory list on the table. Original ownership documents for Kessler and Sons, dated 8 months before the fire, transferring an additional 15% of my remaining shares to a holding company controlled solely by Renata. My signature on the transfer, a signature I never gave. "This document is forged," I said, the first words I'd spoken since the hearing began. My voice came out rougher than I meant it to, but steady. "I never signed that." "Mr. Kessler," Denise said quietly, a hand briefly on my arm, "we'll have the forensic handwriting analysis entered next. You don't have to say anything else." But I wasn't finished. 6 months of silence, of pretending to be smaller and slower and further gone than I was, cracked open all at once. "You didn't just want the house," I said, looking directly at Renata for the first time since she'd stepped over me on the floor of a burning hallway. "You didn't just want the company. You wanted me erased. Legally. On paper. So there'd never be a version of this where I got to say what actually happened that night." Renata said nothing. For the first time, she had nothing to say. If you've ever sat across from someone who hurt you badly and realized in that exact moment that they finally understood you weren't going to disappear quietly, I think you know exactly how that felt. I hope you never have to know it the way I did. The hearing didn't end that day. These things rarely do, but it ended the guardianship petition entirely, dismissed within the hour, and it opened something far bigger, a criminal referral, forgery, insurance fraud, obstruction tied to the falsified fire report Renata's cousin had helped shape. Preston Cade withdrew from the case within a week. I heard, secondhand, that he'd had no idea about the forged transfer documents until that morning, and that mattered to him more than his $400 hourly rate. Renata was indicted 2 months later. I won't pretend I felt triumphant watching it happen. Mostly I felt tired, in a way that went bone deep, the particular exhaustion of a man who spent half a year being underestimated on purpose so he could finally be believed. Daniel didn't go to prison. He wasn't the one who forged documents or paid off a contractor. But the investigation made clear he'd known about the wiring risk for months and said nothing, and that his statement to insurance investigators about confusion and disorientation had been a deliberate lie coached by his wife's family to protect assets he knew weren't fully his to protect. He lost his shares. The board, restructured with Marcus now sitting as head of operations, a position I insisted on, a debt I finally paid back in full, voted him out of any leadership role in Kessler and Sons. His name still carries mine. That was the one thing I couldn't bring myself to take from him. He came to see me in November, at the small house I'd bought myself on the edge of Macon, closer to the river than the old place ever was. Bruno met him at the door first, tail wagging low and uncertain, the way dogs do when they remember someone but aren't sure if it's safe to be glad. Daniel stood on my porch a long time before he said anything. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said finally. Good, I thought, because I don't know yet if I can. "I'm not going to pretend that night didn't happen," I told him. "I'm not going to pretend you didn't put your hands on my chest and choose the dog over your own father. That's going to live in me a long time, Daniel, maybe the rest of my life." He nodded, jaw tight, eyes wet, in a way he was clearly fighting. "But you came back," I said. "Renata never did. That has to mean something. I don't know yet what, but something." I didn't invite him in that day. I did let him sit on the porch steps with me and Bruno until the sun went down over the river, neither of us saying much else, both of us understanding that whatever came next between us would have to be built slow, the same patient way I'd built everything else worth having in my life. It's been 4 months now since that hearing. Kessler and Sons is smaller than it used to be, but it's honest. Every permit pulled, every inspection real, Marcus running the operation side with the same care he once brought to a job I fired him from unfairly. I visit the site in Warner Robins sometimes, the one where his career ended the first time. He's got a plaque with his own name on it now. Renata's trial starts in the spring. I'll testify. I'm not looking forward to it, and I'm not dreading it either. Just ready, the way I was ready the morning I walked into that courthouse. Some nights, I still smell smoke that isn't there. Some nights I still see her face in that hallway, calm as anything, telling the burning house I was already finished. I don't think that goes away. I've stopped expecting it to. What I didn't expect, what still catches me some evenings sitting on my porch with an old dog who never once looked at me the way my daughter-in-law did, is how much room was left in me, after all that anger burned through, for something that isn't quite forgiveness and isn't quite peace either. Just a kind of quiet, earned the hard way. I gave Daniel a second chance he probably didn't deserve, and I made sure Renata answered, in full, for the choice she made in that hallway. I don't know if that makes me a better man than the one who got shoved into the flames, or just a tireder one who ran out of room for more hatred. So I'll ask you what I still ask myself some nights, sitting out here listening to the river. If it had been you on that floor, watching your own child choose the dog and walk away, would you have found it in yourself to let him back onto your porch at all?